by the few over the many. Back in around 1930, Edison and Ford and the head of MIT and Harvard got together and they urged the country to go into a carbohydrate economy from a hydrocarbon. Whatever you can get from hydrocarbons, you get from carbohydrates. In other words, instead of digging into the mines for coal, etc., it comes from our farms, biofuels, etc. Well, it didn't get very far because that was the same time that the synthetic chemical industry was coming of age. DuPont, Dow Chemical, Hooker Chemical, and so forth, and they prevailed. And we went into a hydrocarbon, oil, gas, coal. In 1952, President Truman's Materials Policy Commission recommended that we go solar and said that by 1975, 3/4 of all homes would be solarized. Well, 2 years later, we went nuclear, atoms for peace. Coming out of the horror here at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the scientists believed that their work should not just be known for weapons of mass destruction, should be known for producing electricity. And so the first nuclear plants started being built, and now we have 20% of our electricity from nuclear. Now here's an example of what happens when a handful of electric utilities, scientists, and their government allies push this country toward nuclear instead of toward wind power or non-corn biofuels, solar thermal, solar photovoltaic, passive solar architecture, and so on, many of which have been around for hundreds of years, like wind power and passive solar architecture was evident in the ancient Greeks and Persians and East Africans over 2,000 years ago. I mean, not as refined as we would do it now, but they knew the principles. So nuclear starts being built, and we now have 104 nuclear plants. We have Chernobyl's experience, the 25th anniversary is coming up. There's been a big cover-up by the Western countries about the effects of Chernobyl. True, to be sure, it didn't have a containment the way we have in our plants. However, the official death toll by the International Atomic Energy Commission in Vienna, which its principal purpose is to promote nuclear power, is 9,000 deaths. If you go to 5,000 studies in Slavic languages, which have just been summarized and translated into a compendium put out by the New York Academy of Science, the figure is 1 million. 1 million deaths in the last 25 years. Radiation does not take a holiday. Radiation produces stillbirths, produces cancers. The so-called liquidators, there are now about 850,000 workers, they're still trying to put the cover on this nuclear plant. It's devastatingly hot. And so they bring workers in and they cycle them back until they get a certain exposure. Okay, you're not disqualified. They call them liquidators. There's 850,000 of them. 15% of them are considered in good health. They're aging prematurely. All kinds of adjunct diseases come into effect, besides cancer. Loss of immunity, you get all kinds of other diseases, as you know. And yet, in our country, the official figure from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and congressional committees is 9,000, not 1 million. Because if the truth be told, that would really get people scared. There's an area half the size of New Jersey around Chernobyl, uninhabitable, abandoned towns and villages. Okay, so you say, those are the Russians and the Soviets, we're better. Well, how about the Japanese? Fukushima. 6 nuclear plants altogether. As we speak, the arc of contamination keeps growing and growing. The US now has urged the Japanese government to evacuate 50 miles around the plant. There are more people around Fukushima than around Chernobyl. And unfortunately, one of the plants was burning MOX, which contains plutonium. The question is or will plutonium be released, which is far more deadly than cesium and strontium. All right, how about this country? We had a near miss in Fermi outside Detroit. One scientist said, quote, "We almost lost Detroit." That was in the 60s. Comes down to Browns Ferry, the nuclear plant at the TVA had a fire in the cable system at the bottom of the plant. All these scientists converged, and everything they tried in terms of artificial fire suppressants weren't working, and the cable fire was spreading. I mean, you know where that was headed. And they had a local fire chief standing by. He didn't have a PhD. After they were all out of ideas, he said, "Why don't you try water?" "Oh, it's a good idea, Chief." And he put the fire out in time, just in time. And you have 3 Mile Island. That was a partial meltdown. The problem with radiation is it doesn't label visibly its victims so people can lie about it. But it comes down to this. Would you support the nuclear power industry if you knew, one, that it could not be economically viable without 100% taxpayer loan guarantees for building nuclear plants? Not 90%. Wall Street will not lend your electric company money to build a nuclear plant without getting 100% loan guarantee. That's how risky economically they think nuclear power is. So it is uneconomic. It cannot meet a market test. Why are all these right-wing free market Republicans supporting nuclear power? Because money talks larger than ideology. And the nuclear industry is all over Capitol Hill with their lobbyists. Second, nuclear power is not necessary. We waste the vast amount of our energy simply by improving the efficiency of appliances and electric furnaces and engines and lighting and heating. We could save far more megawatts than the nuclear megawatts we shut down subtract. So it's uneconomic, it cannot meet a market test, it's unnecessary, it's uninsurable. You know, for all you say about the insurance companies, and they do redline us and they abuse us, but when it comes to big business, when an insurance company say, your installation is so risky, we cannot insure it for its possible damage in case something goes wrong, we have to pay attention to that. And so the nuclear industry in 1957 passed a law called Price-Anderson Act, which in effect limited the liability of the nuclear plant in case of a meltdown to about 3% of the possible damage. What is the possible damage? The Atomic Energy Commission estimated that a Class 9 meltdown, that's a total meltdown, would contaminate an area the size of Pennsylvania. It's uninsurable. You're the insurer. Just like in Japan now. It's the Japanese taxpayers who are insurable. And have you been reading the stories of the contaminated fish and the farmers don't know if they can plant and they can't come back home and the stuff is radioactive in their kitchen and they don't know what the truth is and nobody knows what the truth is and it keeps getting bigger and it's dumping contaminated water into the ocean? And can they eat the fish? And who do you trust? And now it's hundreds of square miles and it's growing. Here's the bottom line. We do not play Russian roulette with the people of this country and its land in order to support with our tax dollars an uneconomic and unnecessary nuclear technology whose only purpose is to boil water to produce steam. And yet, what has been the reaction of Obama after Fukushima? What has been the reaction of Secretary of Energy Chu, Nobel Prize-winning physicist? What has been the reaction of the nuclear industry? What has been the reaction of their supporters in Congress? Oh, we will learn from Fukushima, and we will have even more safe nuclear plants, and full speed ahead with your taxpayer guarantee. In other words, this is not only technologically insane, the reaction to it is insanity. This is what happens when a few decide for the many. You think if we have a major nuclear meltdown in this country, that any of the promoters of nuclear power are going to be executed? Are going to be given life sentences? Are going to be put in solitary confinement? Are even going to be prosecuted at all? No, not at all. And if you're not part of the risk, you promote the risk. What would happen here in Wisconsin if one of these went? What would happen to the dairy farmers, to the children, to the rollover of radiation, generation after generation? You know, it's around for thousands of years. Plutonium is around for 250,000 years, has a half-life of 23,000 years. They say, well, it's either that or coal. No, it's not either that or coal. It's either nuclear or efficiency. It's either nuclear or solar. It's either nuclear or wind power. It's either nuclear or 100 ways that technologists are now, and scientists are now developing to replace fossil fuels and nuclear forever. Look at global climate change. You listen to Rush Limbaugh, he will deny global climate change until his radio station melts down and is sailing off into the Atlantic. There is no evidence that can counter his belief that it's all phony. You go to Alaska, go to the Andes, go to Greenland, you know, go anywhere where the pronounced effects are very visible. And you say, well, it certainly is warming up. I mean, the last 10 years have been the hottest 10 years out of the, you know, since recorded. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 as warm 20 years ago. They said, do you look outside? Does that look like global warming? See, this is the kind of stuff you get on radio, on talk radio. 90% dominated by ideologues inebriated with their own ideology, garnished by fact-starved abstractions. Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh. I accused them a few months ago of being on welfare. They were stunned. I said, you're on welfare. Your radio stations are using our